The dust devils spun lazy circles across the barren landscape, their sandy fingers reaching toward a sky bleached white by the oppressive sun. Forward Operating Base Phoenix sat hunched in the middle of nowhere, a sprawling collection of tents, HESCO barriers, and the constant low thrum of generators that never seemed to stop. For the men of SEAL Team 3, it was just another stop in a seemingly endless rotation of deployments. At another slice of rocky hell in a country that had seen more war than peace. They were the tip of the spear, the silent professionals, and they carried themselves with the quiet confidence of men who had looked death in the eye and simply nodded in recognition. Among them moved a figure who was both part of the Brotherhood and distinctly separate. Ethan, the field medic, was a wiry man with steady hands and a voice that rarely rose above a calm, measured tone. He wasn't a SEAL by trade, but by attachment. He belonged to the unit, yet he wasn't one of the trigger pullers. His weapon was a medical bag, his battlefield the few feet of dirt surrounding a wounded man. The SEALs respected him, which was the highest praise they could offer. They trusted him with their lives, literally. When a bullet tore through flesh, or an IED turned the world to fire and noise, it was Ethan they screamed for. He had patched them up in the dark, under fire, with nothing but headlamp and grit. He had held pressure on wounds that would have killed lesser men, his face a mask of intense concentration. He had seen them at their most vulnerable, their most broken, and he had never flinched. The mission was straightforward, the kind they had done 100 times. A night raid on a suspected compound, intel suggested a high-value target. They lifted off in the blacked-out MH-60S, the wind from the rotors whipping the dust into a frenzy. The men were silent, each lost in their own pre-mission ritual. Ethan sat near the ramp, feeling the vibration of the aircraft through his boots. He checked his medical kit for the 5th time, his fingers moving over the familiar contents. Hemostatic gauze, tourniquets, chest seals, morphine auto-injectors. His M4 was slung across his chest, but it felt like a foreign object. His true purpose was in the bag at his feet. They inserted fast and hard, and the helicopters touching down for mere seconds before the men were off, disappearing into the ink-black night. The compound was a dark huddle of mud-brick walls. The breach was silent, controlled. They moved through the courtyard with practiced precision, stacking on doors, their night vision painting the world in shades of green. That's when the world exploded. It started with a single muzzle flash from a rooftop, then another, then the staccato roar of AK-47s filled the night, so the sound tearing through the silence like a jagged blade. The SEALs reacted instantly, returning fire, their movements sharp and economical. The air cracked with supersonic rounds. "Contact front!" someone yelled. Ethan was already low, pressed against a wall, his eyes scanning for the telltale sign of a downed man. The firefight was intense but brief. It was a poorly organized ambush, and the SEALs' superior firepower quickly suppressed the enemy, but not before they had done their damage. Man down! Medic up!" The call came from his left, sharp and urgent. It was Jonesy's voice. Ethan's heart lurched, but his legs were already moving, his body responding to the call before his brain had fully processed it. He sprinted low, his medkit bouncing against his hip. He found them in a small alcove. Jonesy was crouched over a figure lying motionless on the ground. It was Marcus, one of the youngest on the team, a husband of 2 years, a father of none. "He's hit bad, E. In the neck. I can't stop the bleeding." Jonesy's voice was tight, strained. Ethan shoved Jonesy aside gently and went to work. The wound was a nightmare. A piece of shrapnel or a ricochet had caught Marcus in the side of the neck. Blood was pulsing out, a dark arterial flow that was soaking into the dry ground. Ethan didn't think. He just did. His hands moved with a life of their own, packing the wound with hemostatic gauze, applying direct pressure, his fingers finding the pressure point. His face was inches from Marcus's, and he could see the life fading from the young man's eyes. "Stay with me, Marcus. You hear me? You stay with me," Ethan said, his voice calm, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "Jonesy, I need a light over here, now." The firefight was dying down, the sporadic shots becoming more distant. The team leader, a grizzled veteran named Lieutenant Commander Hatcher, came on the radio. "Status! I need a status! Marcus is down! Ty's working on him!" Jonesy radioed back, his voice cracking. The world narrowed to the small pool of light from Jonesy's tactical flashlight and the bleeding man beneath Ethan's hands. Minutes stretched into eternities. Ethan got the bleeding under control, packing the wound, applying a pressure dressing. He checked Marcus's airway, his breathing. It was shallow, but it was there. He fumbled for a needle decompression kit, worried about a possible tension pneumothorax. And the gunfire had stopped completely now, replaced by the ominous sound of silence. "Chief, we need a medevac, now. He's not stable," Ethan called out. "They're on their way, Doc. 5 minutes," Hatch's voice came back, a solid anchor in the dark. In those 5 minutes, as they waited for the birds, Ethan did something he hadn't done since he'd joined the unit. He looked at Marcus's face, really looked at it. He saw the boyish features, the smear of blood across his cheek, and the way his eyelids fluttered. And in that moment, a lifetime of carefully constructed walls began to crumble. He saw his little brother. It was a ghost he had been running from for a decade. His brother, Liam, 2 years younger. They had been inseparable as kids until the accident, until the car, until Ethan, at 16, had been the one to find Liam after he had wrapped his motorcycle around a tree. He had held Liam then, too, his hands covered in his brother's blood, and trying to stop a bleed he didn't know how to stop. He had watched the life fade from Liam's eyes, powerless, just a kid with a cell phone and a paralyzing fear. That was the day he had decided to become a medic. It was the day he had buried his emotions under a mountain of training and clinical detachment. He would never be powerless again. He would never let another person die in his hands. But now, kneeling in the dirt of a foreign land, with the coppery smell of Marcus's blood mixing with the acrid scent of gunpowder, the past and present collided. The man he was fighting to save wasn't just a SEAL. He was a reminder of the brother he had failed. The medevac Black Hawk came in hot, the wind from its rotors nearly flattening them. Ethan helped load Marcus onto the stretcher, his hands still coated in blood. He didn't realize he was crying until a saline drop hit his own hand. He wiped his face with his sleeve, besmearing Marcus's blood across his cheek. "Doc, you're going with him," Hatch ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Get him to the CSH, that's an order." Ethan climbed into the bird and they were off, lifting into the night sky. Inside the helicopter, the noise was deafening. A flight medic took over, but Ethan stayed close, monitoring Marcus's vitals. His mind was a hurricane. The face of his brother, the face of Marcus, they were one and the same. He had spent his entire adult life building a fortress around that memory, and in one night, it had been shattered. At the Combat Support Hospital, a whirlwind of activity. They rushed Marcus into the operating room. Ethan was left standing in the hallway, covered in blood, his hands hanging limply at his sides. A nurse approached him, a young woman with kind eyes. She looked at the blood, at his dazed expression, at the standard-issue uniform that marked him as a support soldier and not a combat operator. "Are you okay? Were you hit?" she asked, concern in her voice. "Let's get you checked out." Ethan just shook his head, not trusting his voice. He followed her into a treatment bay. She started to gently clean the blood from his hands and face, her movements efficient and practiced. She asked him questions he didn't hear. She was looking for wounds, for shrapnel. She pulled at the collar of his blood-soaked uniform, checking his neck, his shoulders. As she did, And a chain he wore around his neck came loose from under his shirt. On it was a simple, worn silver ring. The nurse's hand froze. Her eyes locked onto the ring. It wasn't a wedding band. Not quite. It was too thin, too delicate. It was a man's ring, but small. Her gaze slowly traveled from the ring to Ethan's face, studying the contours, the shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw. Something clicked in her memory, a photograph from a lifetime ago. "Ethan?" she whispered, when her voice barely audible over the din of the hospital. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She had kind eyes, brown eyes, familiar eyes. Confusion etched itself onto his face. "Rachel?" he breathed, the name falling from his lips like a forgotten prayer. It was Rachel, Liam's girlfriend from high school, the girl his brother had been madly in love with, the girl who had been at the funeral. Her face a mask of grief so profound it had haunted Ethan's nightmares alongside his brother's final moments. She was a nurse, here, in this godforsaken corner of the world. The silence between them was deafening, louder than the rotors of the Black Hawk, louder than the gunfire. 10 years, 10 years of running, 10 years of burying the past under the weight of his duty. And here, in the sterile, chaotic heart of a war zone, with his brother's blood still staining his hands, yet he had run right into it. The SEALs who had followed the medevac, who had come to check on their medic and their brother, arrived at the door of the treatment bay. Hatch, Jonesy, and 2 others. They stopped dead in their tracks. They saw their medic, the unflappable Ethan, sitting on a gurney, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. They saw the nurse, her own eyes glistening, holding his blood-covered hands in hers. They didn't understand what they were seeing, but they felt the profound, sacred weight of the moment. Jonesy opened his mouth to speak, but Hatch put a firm hand on his chest, stopping him. The lieutenant commander just shook his head slowly. He didn't know the story, but he knew trauma. He knew the look of a man whose carefully constructed walls had just come crashing down. He knew that some battles weren't fought with bullets. He quietly pulled the door closed, leaving Ethan and Rachel alone in the harsh fluorescent light. Inside, Rachel finally spoke. I never thought... I looked for you. After the funeral. You just disappeared." Ethan's voice was a ragged whisper. "I couldn't... I saw him, Rach. I held him, and I couldn't do anything. I was just a kid. I couldn't save him." The confession, held inside for so long it had become a part of him, poured out in a broken torrent. "So I became this. I became a medic. I thought if I could save everyone else, maybe it would be enough. Maybe I could forget." Rachel squeezed his hands. "Forget? Ethan, you don't forget. You carry it, just like I carried him. Just like you're carrying Marcus's blood right now. It doesn't wash off, not really." She touched the ring on the chain. "Is that—" "It's his," Ethan choked out. "I took it from his finger. I've worn it every day since. A reminder of what I couldn't do." Rachel looked at him, seeing the scared 16-year-old boy behind the combat medic's eyes. She saw the weight he had been carrying, a burden no one should have to bear alone. She had been carrying her own weight, the grief of a first love lost, the questions that never had answers. "He loved you, you know," she said softly. "Liam, he talked about you all the time. His big brother. His hero." Ethan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Some hero." "The best kind," Rachel insisted. "The kind who gets back up and tries to save the next person. The kind who carries his brother's ring into a war zone. And the kind who gets covered in blood and doesn't stop fighting." Outside the door, Hatch and the others stood guard. They didn't know the specifics, but they understood the essence. Their medic, their brother, had just been broken open. And in that vulnerability, in that quiet room, something new was being forged. A connection to a past he had tried to outrun. A chance, perhaps, for a different kind of healing. The chaos of the hospital continued around them. It was a world of wounded bodies and urgent cries. But for a few moments in that small room, there was only the quiet and the blood and the slow, painful beginning of a truth that had been buried for far too long. The SEALs waited, silent sentinels guarding a moment they didn't fully comprehend, but knew with absolute certainty was as important as any mission they had ever run.